James Brown, the godfather of soul, dies and leaves behind an incredible 50-year musical legacy.
There would be no Prince, there would be no Michael Jackson without what James Brown did on stage.
He's like lightning in a bottle. You know, he'd dance across the stage, lackady hairdos, the shiny shoes, just amazing talent. And I think one that anyone who saw him, he was a showstopper, you know?
But the entertainer leaves his family with next to nothing.
With his voice very elevated, Mr. Dallas, they are not gonna ride my back when I'm gone. Do you hear me?
It drives a stake into the Brown family, pitting his loved ones against one another.
In the late 90s, my grandfather was sued. Not by some record company, not by his trustees, but by his children.
Christmas Day 2006. Funk music superstar James Brown dies in an Atlanta hospital of congestive heart failure after a bout of pneumonia. He is 73 years old. Just 2 days earlier, James Brown is on his way to the hospital at the request of his dentist, who thinks he's too sick to undergo routine dental implant work. In the days before his death, Brown's son Daryl has urged him to slow down and take better care of himself.
You gotta get your health together, man. You gotta get yourself together. You know, you ain't no spring chicken, you know, and everything. And we talked for a long time. He said, "Thank you, son." He said, "Thank you for talking to me like that."
Brown's daughter Yama is in Atlanta, preparing to celebrate Christmas with her children.
My dad hated hospitals. He did not want to go. He fought tooth and nail about going.
Brown stays overnight for observation, but by December 24th, his condition is no better.
He was real sick, man. I could hear it in his voice. He's very shortness of breath. And you can hear the ammonia. You can hear the breaking up real bad.
I called him the day before and I said, "Look, I'm coming to see you." And he's like, "No, don't come." And I said, "Well, tomorrow's Christmas." And I said, "So if you're still in the hospital, I'm coming to see you on Christmas."
Brown's wife, backup singer Tommy Ray Heine, is on the West Coast. She and her son James Jr. are on their way home to South Carolina to be with Brown for Christmas. She has no idea that time is running out. Albert Buddy Dallas is Brown's lawyer of 24 years and one of his closest advisors.
It was 1:20 in the morning, Christmas morning. I received a call from Mr. Charles Bobbitt. Mr. Bobbitt was a long-time road manager, personal assistant to Mr. Brown, was with Mr. Brown when he passed. And it was the voice of Mr. Bobbitt saying simply, "Mr. Dallas, he's gone."
And I just screamed. I couldn't even, what do you mean? I couldn't say anything. I couldn't believe it.
And it's like when JFK was killed, when Dr. King was shot, we all kind of remember where we were and what we were doing, and you know, this is the way it affected me and so many others.
I went from grieving literally for about maybe 15, 20 minutes to getting thrust into, now you gotta get everything together.
It's kind of like you'd like to be able to press the rewind button, you know, go back to a time that had not occurred, but that's not reality.
R.J. Smith covered Brown's life and music in his biography, The One.
It wasn't a Christmas anymore. It was a sad day. And I listened to a lot of his music that day.
He was the greatest, just like they say he was. You know, I mean, as a musician, I'm not saying it because I'm son, but I'm saying it because as a musician and what he's done for the music, what he's done for music, American music, rhythm and blues, soul, funk. He's the creator of funk.
Grandson William James Brown remembers the godfather of soul.
He's like lightning in a bottle. You know, he'd dance across the stage, lackady hairdos, the shiny shoes, just amazing talent. And I think one that anyone who saw him, he was a showstopper, you know?
While Brown's family and friends are in mourning, Albert Dallas steps into his role as trustee of his late client's estate.
I was named as trustee and personal representative, along with two others, Judge Al Bradley, who was a magistrate judge there in Aiken, South Carolina, and who was road manager with Mr. Brown from 1991 until 2002. David Cannon was Mr. Brown's financial man in the organization.
Within hours, Cannon approaches Yama Brown about some of her father's business affairs.
He's like, well, we got this movie deal we gotta close. You know, your dad didn't get a chance to sign this. We've got some other things we're working on. We really need to get together and talk about how this is gonna go forward.
Immediately, she suspects that something's not right.
I said, no, what we really need to do is figure out his funeral. You're talking about business, and he hasn't even been dead 2 hours. It was ridiculous.
Brown's spouse, Tommy Ray, returns to the mansion, the home she shared with Brown for the past 10 years, and is shocked to find it off limits. Her strained relationship with Brown's adult children leads her to assume they are behind this.
We told her several times, we are not responsible. First of all, we're not the trustees. We don't have the ability to close the doors, lock the doors. We don't even have keys.
Brown's children aren't the only ones who are on the outs with Tommy Ray Heine.
And I secured it. I have no apology for securing it. In fact, had I not done that, I'm sure I would have been sued for not doing my job.
Dallas's decision apparently stems from a long-standing friction between Tommy Ray Heine and the three trustees, who question the very legitimacy of her relationship to the much older Brown.
There was a lot of controversy around her because she came so late in his life and there was so many years difference.
There are 36 years between the two.
When he met her, she was in Vegas. She was not exactly the type of woman that you would bring home to your mother.
January 2007, as tempers die down over the new year, Yama and Daryl and their 4 adult siblings, Terry, Larry, Venetia, and Deanna, gather for the reading of the will along with Tommy Ray, but they're all in for a shock.
He left to 6 named children my household personal effects.
The children are to receive nothing else.
There are certain things that he wouldn't do, and one thing he wouldn't do is ever cut his family out of things. And when I say that, I don't mean financially, and most people think that's what I mean. I'm talking about making decisions about his future.
Was I surprised when the reading of the will? No. Surprised by what? James Brown did what he wanted to do, man. Nobody make him do that.
Brown allocates a part of his estate to the Brown Family Education Trust for his grandchildren's educations. The rest go to Brown's pet charity, the I Feel Good Trust.
He then left a provision that says, everything else on the planet I leave to needy and underprivileged children to be educated in institutions in the states of Georgia and South Carolina.
Everything else on the planet is Brown's house and the royalties from his music, estimated to be worth at least $20 million. According to Albert Dallas, Brown knew what he was doing when he first thought up the I Feel Good Trust for needy children in 1987.
I said, Mr. Brown, I'm just fascinated by your announcement of leaving everything to the I Feel Good Children's Trust, needy and underprivileged children. I said, it's just awesome that you plan to do this. But do you mind telling me what you plan to do for your children? In a cat-like manner, he literally came down right in front of me with his finger in my face, with his voice very elevated. Mr. Dallas, they are not gonna ride my back when I'm gone. Do you hear me?
Yama Brown denies her father would ever make such a statement.
He never made any indications like, I'm gonna cut you guys out of the will and I'm giving it to somebody else because I just don't love you.
The will also makes no provisions for Tommy Ray Heine or James Brown Jr.
Tommy Ray came forward. That was not a good time for everybody. You know, it was just like, I'm the wife. I get to say this, get to say that. And of course, the trustees are saying, you're not even in the will.
He did what he wanted. That was James Brown. He did it his way.
To leave out his wife, to leave out his child, I don't know.
The will sparks an immediate debate over Brown's last wishes. His grandson, William James, defends the will from the get-go.
A lot of needs have come about in this legal process since he's passed away. A lot of needs, I might say, that run contradictory to the needs of James Brown, who only had a need to educate children.
Giving hope to children comes naturally to Brown, who grew up without it on the mean streets of Augusta, Georgia.
He lived in a neighborhood called the Terry. They called it the Terry because it stood for the Negro territory.
The only place they could stay was an aunt that he had. Honeybell, she ran a prostitution home.
He saw a lot of things at a really, really young age that I can't even imagine.
Learned to sing and dance for nickels, dimes, and quarters. I think he supplemented that income with the theft of some hubcaps along the way.
Before long, Brown has a setback that will really leave him singing the blues.
You could knock him down, but incredibly, he'd get back up again. It's just the mentality of James Brown.
James Brown's family is shocked to learn that the majority of the musician's estate will not go to them. Instead, it will go towards the education of needy children. James Joseph Brown is born into poverty on May 3, 1933, the son of farmer Joseph Brown and his wife Susie.
My grandfather was born in Barnwell, South Carolina, in the middle of a shack out in the middle of the woods.
You know, dirt poor, playing in the woods, making beats and sounds in the woods.
His mother, Susie, leaves young James and his father Joseph for another man when James is still a toddler.
Unfortunately, my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather had some issues that were not always the best of sorts.
The future soul superstar comes to see his mother's early departure as more of a betrayal than the regular beatings he endures from his father.
The only place they could stay was an aunt that he had. Honeybell, she ran a prostitution home. And for many years, my grandfather had to sleep in a prostitution bed. And of course, when the ladies needed work, he'd have to give up that bed.
So he saw a lot of things at a really, really young age that I can't even imagine. I have kids of my own, so I can't even imagine them growing up like that.
School takes a back seat to a more basic need, survival. Brown hits the streets of Augusta and earns his first few dollars as a performer.
Augusta was a big city, and Augusta was a tough city.
Learned to sing and dance for nickels, dimes, and quarters. I think he supplemented that income with the theft of some hubcaps along the way.
So there's not much you can do with a sixth-grade education back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But the one thing he did have was talent. So he was, focused on, I've got a talent, I need to discipline myself to grow my talent.
His education was from the University of Hard Knocks and from Survival University.
It's this lack of education that leads Brown, decades later, to devise the I Feel Good Trust.
The intention of that trust was to educate children, young poor children. And he specifically didn't want color. He thought that we'd gone through that too many times for far too long. And that what we really needed to do was focus on helping every child that's poor get an education, because that's the only way that you're going to get an education.
Brown doesn't have a team of advisors when he is arrested for stealing clothes at age 16. He quickly learns firsthand the difficulties of being a young black man incarcerated in the South.
Mr. Brown was always a survivor. You could knock him down, but incredibly, he'd get back up again. It's just the mentality of James Brown.
Here's a man who grows up from nothing in a prostitution home. And he goes from a prostitution home to the White House. And talent takes you there. Hard work takes you there. Every child can relate to that in this country, to start from nothing and become everything. He is what we teach every child to be every day.
And there's something about music, man. I don't care how bad things are in your life. When you hit that note and you play that music, everything goes away.
In his third year of juvenile detention, while playing baseball against a local team, he meets civilian Bobby Bird. The two become fast friends. When Brown is released from prison in the early 1950s, Bird invites Brown to sing in his band, the Famous Flames. Gospel music will be Brown's salvation.
Bobby Bird was a very loyal sideman to James Brown throughout his career. A lot of people know him as the godfather of the Godfather, in a sense. He really looked after him and was really there from the start.
Brown has his first hit with the Famous Flames in 1955. Please, Please, Please sells over 1 million copies. Brown assimilates all of his musical influences and invents his own sound.
There's all these moving parts going in and out. There's a lot of tension created between the drums and the bass, how they're together and apart at the same time. It creates this sort of anticipation that makes us feel a certain energy, that makes us dance.
And of course, my grandfather being boisterous and someone who, was in your face a little bit. It wasn't long thereafter he was released that people knew this man can sing, James can sing. And he started singing with Bobby in the choir. And it wasn't too long after he started singing, he wanted to be up front.
And he was so at peace, it was just his comfort zone. He loved the stage. And I believe that's what kept him alive for so long.
He had a little pep in his step. He had style, he had charisma. He had that thing that makes you want to look at him and watch him do his thing on the stage.
As a physical performer, it's really tough to match James Brown. He was incredibly influential. There would be no Prince, there would be no Michael Jackson without what James Brown did on stage. I'm not even talking about music, I'm talking about the way this guy moved his body.
Brown's popularity eventually supersedes the other band members, and he becomes the main attraction. His 1962 recording of Night Train reaches Billboard's top 40, and his constant touring and several business ventures earn him several nicknames.
It's the godfather of soul, the hardest working man in show business, Butane James, the new minister of the super heavy funk. He was a big fella.
Brown appears in the 1964 concert movie The Tammy Show and upstages the headliners, the Rolling Stones.
If you had the privilege of going to a concert, you saw a man really give everything he had.
He was a born performer, and the thing that was amazing about him is he just exuded this tremendous amount of energy, but he kept it very tightly controlled on stage.
That control includes keeping a tight rein on his musicians as well.
You had to show up to the show looking proper, you had to be dressed properly, every detail had to be in its perfect place, and then he would just go on stage and explode out of these really tight sort of situations.
When you would see him spin around and point his finger at a member of the band, it just cost that band member $50 because he was slightly late or off-key.
Darrell Brown played lead guitar in his father's band for many years.
And he had the thing, where you flick his hands, and that's $5, $10, $15, $20, $25, $50. I got fined one time, man. It's funny, and he never took the money, but it was still a lesson, because I knew what I had did. I knew exactly what I did. I'm not telling, but I knew what I did, and it was like, and I was like, God.
I don't think I've ever seen anyone move their feet as fast as James Brown could move his. And he says, well, Miss Dallas, when you're out there on the Chitlin circuit and you're coming through Louisiana and the sheriff decides that he wants to see you dance and he starts firing bullets at your feet, he says, Miss Dallas, you can move them really, really fast.
As the civil rights movement gets underway, James Brown's music in many ways becomes the soundtrack for the struggle.
Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. That sort of became a rally cry. These are lyrics that became a rally cry for the Black Power movement and for Black pride and Black identity in general.
I think at that time he recognized who he was and what he had to offer in terms of the love, the ability to speak to his people, the ability to transcend, again, race and color and creed, to speak to the voice, the frustrations of a generation of people.
I will keep on going. I will, say what I need to say. It's gonna be unpopular, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I just feel like it's the right thing to do, and I feel like I need to pull up my people in the process and just make them feel proud of who they are.
The 1970s are a peak period for Brown, with hits like Get Up and Get Up Off of That Thing, but he's later knocked off the charts by the disco movement of the late 70s.
Disco was not about sweatiness and rawness. It was a little more glossy and a little smoother. It was about new stars, not old stars that we already knew.
By the early 1980s, Brown's fortune is nearly depleted.
It was tough for him because he wasn't kind of at the top like, he was before.
Now, on the verge of bankruptcy, the hardest working man in show business can't get a job. Enter lawyer Albert Buddy Dallas.
The banks really didn't want any of his business. He really was not a very popular figure in 1984. Mr. Brown and I developed quickly a personal friendship in addition to our professional relationship.
My grandfather was going through the IRS, coming in to try to take his possessions and his assets in a time when no one would deal with my grandfather. Banks, financial institutions. He was at the very bottom of his luck at this time. Buddy Dallas came in, took him on as a client, paid his bills up to a point where he could just get them back to zero.
They were impounding vehicles he owned and other things. I think he was in danger of losing a house he really loved on Beach Island in South Carolina. And Buddy Dallas bought the house for him and turned it over to James Brown.
It was kind of hard times. I mean, there was very little money, and many times I would have to cover expenses myself. But I did that in 1984 and 85 when we were trying to resurrect things. I was the only source of credit because Mr. Brown didn't have any.
With Dallas's help, Brown manages to turn things around and enjoys a resurgence with the hit single Living in America and several movie and TV appearances. But Brown's newfound popularity makes him a target for those wishing to profit from him. Some suspect that Tommy Ray Heine tried to take advantage of James Brown from day one.
Everybody figured she was a gold digger and she was after his money, and she could have been, she could have been after his money.
And then there's some shocking news.
The child produced through the supposed marriage could not have been his child.
Mr. Brown was totally humiliated by the developments with Miss Ray.
She refused to come see this man on his deathbed and decided rather to stay in Las Vegas and have her a good time.
Before his death, James Brown decides to leave much of the wealth he's accumulated over his 50-year career towards the education of needy boys and girls, leaving his children and spouse out in the cold. 1994, Tommy Ray Heine is 25 when she auditions to be a backup singer for Brown, who is 36 years her senior. Within 3 months, they are a couple.
I don't know what her initial intentions were, but I'm sure he afforded her a different lifestyle than she never had, so most people would have probably went for it. You have James Brown interested in you, and you're gonna go for it.
Tommy Ray gives birth to a boy in June of 2001. Brown is elated at the prospect of a half-black, half-white son and names him James Brown Jr. The couple are married later that year.
He fell in love with her. That's the woman he wanted to be with.
But on Christmas Day 2006, newly widowed Tommy Ray can't believe what is happening to her.
Why would you lock Tommy Ray out? Hell, Tommy Ray had been gone since October. She was not a resident of the mansion anymore. She had no right to be there after Mr. Brown left us.
Everybody figured she was a gold digger and she was after his money, and she could have been, she could have been after his money.
The trustees turn Tommy Ray away because they claim her marriage to Brown is not valid. The claim opens up a can of worms from Tommy Ray's past.
Tommy Ray claims to be the spouse of Mr. Brown. We all know that Miss Ray was married to another man at the time that she engaged in a ceremonial marriage to Mr. Brown.
Years before his death, Brown is shocked to learn that Tommy Ray is already married. In 1997, she had wed a Pakistani immigrant in an alleged green card fraud. The union is only annulled in 2004, long after the couple's 2001 wedding. Under South Carolina law, this renders her marriage to Brown null and void.
Mr. Brown was totally humiliated by the developments. Miss Ray sought an annulment. There were agreements between Miss Ray and Mr. Brown's counsel that she would never, ever seek to claim a common law relationship with Mr. Brown.
I think he tried to make her into the type of woman she ought to be. I just think he failed at it.
James Brown is free to remarry Tommy Ray Heine after her previous marriage is annulled. but he never does. And to many in Brown's circle, the marriage controversy is just the tip of the iceberg.
The child produced through the supposed marriage could not have been his child, for the simple fact we now know that my grandfather had many procedures done that would not have allowed him to have a child.
According to Albert Dallas, Tommy Ray Heine's son is born nearly 2 decades after Brown undergoes an irreversible vasectomy. Brown and Tommy Ray Heine are nowhere near each other during the 10 months prior to the birth of James Jr. To Dallas, it boils down to a simple question of geographical impossibility.
Mr. Brown's over on the East Coast, and she's in Vegas or LA during that period of time.
Depending on who you talk to, DNA testing of James Brown Jr. is either kept private or it never happens at all. His paternity remains unresolved to this day. Meanwhile, a legal battle is brewing over the I Feel Good Trust, which ignores the interests of Brown's spouse and children in favor of children he doesn't even know.
When I look at his will, I think about, gosh, how did he ever, how could he have signed this without being properly advised?
Albert Dallas is quick to respond to this.
Anyone who could make such a statement as that obviously did not know Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown was a person that would influence you, but I absolutely assure you, you were not going to influence Mr. Brown.
Nobody's there pulling your damn arm. Okay, nobody's there telling you, no, don't put that there, don't do that.
When your lawyer tells you one thing, and that's your friend, you believe it. And he didn't look at all those contracts, he signed them.
Trust and estate lawyer James M. Kane shares his take on it.
I'm not suggesting James Brown didn't read his document, I don't know. But even clients who read the documents closely will not have the recall ability generally to tell you what all these various provisions are.
Dad never got higher than a 7th grade education, and he felt like that stifled him in the sense because he didn't know a lot of things about contracts.
But Brown did know a thing or two about Tommy Ray Heine, according to his grandson, William James.
The fact she refused to come see this man on his deathbed and decided rather to stay in Las Vegas and have her a good time, gave him all the knowledge about this woman he needed to know, such that in his last hours he would request of my father, don't let this woman come around, do not let this woman close to anything that makes James Brown who James Brown is.
Nevertheless, on February 1st, 2007, Tommy Ray files a petition asserting that she is Brown's rightful widow and has a 2001 marriage certificate to prove it.
Miss Ray has proceeded as if she was Mr. Brown's spouse. Mr. Brown never remarried Miss Ray, even in the face of numerous requests by Miss Ray that he remarry her.
She also claims that the August 2000 will used to determine the division of the estate is not the most current one, and that Brown often had the tendency to change it according to his temperament. Albert Dallas stands by his client's recognized will.
Mr. Brown's documents speak for themselves. Did he devise or not? And the answer is he did. Are we not then duty-bound, obligated to enforce his wishes in a court of law? I think we are.
The accusations continue to fly, and before long, allegations emerge that James Brown may have been duped by his closest advisors.
Within the course of 2.5 years, that money went from about $25 million down to zero.
While years before his death, Brown himself is named in a lawsuit filed by his own children.
Mr. Brown said to me, they don't know what that's cost them.
James Brown dies and makes little to no provisions for his family. While widow Tommy Ray Heine fights her own battles, children Yama and Deanna Brown suspect foul play on behalf of the estate's 3 trustees and decide to take matters into their own hands. January 2007, Albert Dallas and his fellow trustees are unable to present a complete portrait of Brown's financial status at the time of his death. To Yama Brown, it's just not good enough.
I don't know what else I could have done to have made everything transparent to the children.
On January 26th, less than 1 week after the reading of Brown's will, Yama and Deanna Brown's lawyer files an emergency petition for the termination of the estate's trustees.
We asked for their removal. That was one thing that we asked for after there was they couldn't account for certain things.
Dallas is shocked at the children's decision. He remembers Brown as someone who never mixed family with business.
One literally had to have an appointment to get in to see him, and that was true with the children. I mean, Mr. Brown was a very private man when he was not on the road. Fortunately, I was one of those that he allowed in that circle.
The children paint a complicated portrait of what it was like to grow up a Brown.
Picture your dad, okay, and then you having about 1 million brothers and sisters, you know, because we had to share them with the world. So picture that. Just imagine that way, and that was James Brown, the dad.
I could hug him, you know, nestle in his chest, just like any daughter would do their father. But there was always that flip side when you got to be around James Brown, the entertainer, and then you had to share him with the rest of the world.
He wasn't there very often. You know, he was out trying to hone his talent, trying to be James Brown, trying to travel the Chitlin circuit in the South as it was. And he was not allowed really to spend too much time with his family and be James Brown at the same time.
My mom would always have to explain to us, you know, Dad's working, you know, he'll be back and things like that.
Relations between Brown and his children are put to the test when he's arrested in 1988 following a high-speed, drug-fueled car chase with the police. Brown is armed and is high on PCP, angel dust.
To me, it's amazing that he survived that car chase. So many police around him with shotguns, shooting out the tires of his car.
I don't know where they thought Mr. Brown would be going. I mean, everybody in the world knew who he was.
Brown serves just over 2 years in prison. His arrest causes a media frenzy.
As a child, it was difficult, and people don't really think about stuff like that. They don't think about how it affects his family, his wife, his kids, things like that.
No one knows exactly when he started smoking PCP. Some people say it might have been as early as the early 70s. A number of people say he smoked it on and off for the rest of his life.
We sometimes wonder, well, why do these artists and entertainers, you know, wind up with drugs or drug charges and so forth? Trying to stay up to give a performance and the grueling schedule they keep is probably the answer.
Him having a rough time with drugs, I always look at it as him having a rough time with himself, his demons. Okay, he was still human, man. He's just like anybody else, you know what I'm saying?
According to Yama Brown, her father's habit makes him susceptible to manipulation.
A lot of people took advantage of him during that time period because he was not thinking in his right mind and things like that.
Brown's last hit single, Living in America, drops in 1985. And by the time Brown is released from jail, money is tight again.
He had enormous amounts of debt from years on the road and traveling with, you know, entourages of dozens upon dozens of people.
In 1999, Brown takes out a $25 million bond as an advance against future royalty revenue. The bond is set up by his accountant and future trustee, David Cannon.
Within the course of 2.5 years, that money went from about $25 million down to zero.
Brown is unaware that Cannon receives a check from the fund for $5 million during this period and buys property in Honduras. This sets off alarm bells for Yama Brown.
That happened while he was still alive, and he didn't know it because he trusted him to do the right thing with his nest egg. God knows what they're going to do when you're gone and you're not here to defend yourself.
David Cannon didn't deceive anybody, says Albert Dallas.
Let me tell you something. Mr. Brown could go ghetto on you pretty damn quick. And to suggest that someone took Mr. Brown's money, I would say to them, Mr. Brown didn't know to the penny what he had, but he damn sure knew to the dollar.
Yama Brown's lawyer will later use Cannon's alleged wrongdoings as an argument to have him removed as a trustee. Meanwhile, William James Brown has an allegation of his own, this one against his aunts, Yama and Deanna Brown.
In the late 90s, my grandfather was sued. Not by some record company, not by his trustees, but by his children. He was sued by his children for songs they claimed they wrote.
In the mid-1970s, Brown creates a publishing company in the name of his daughters, Yama and Deanna, to manage the rights of certain songs.
Because he put the songs in our names, obviously when we were very young, he wanted us to have something, you know, to have something that was ours.
Not so, according to Brown's grandson.
My grandfather put these songs in their name to avoid taxes.
Deanna and Yama sought to recover those songs from Mr. Brown against his will, against his wishes, and brought litigation to collect royalties on those songs.
My sister and I, Deanna, sued Warner Chappell, and my dad was named in the suit because he was a performer on the songs that we sued about.
Yama also claims that Brown is on their side during the entire process. The lawsuit is settled in Yama and Deanna Brown's favor, but it leaves a sour taste in the mouths of many who claim that Brown was incensed at his daughter's betrayal.
That did more to influence James Brown to put his values and his assets and everything he had inside this trust to educate children and not leave it to his family than any trustee could have ever done.
Mr. Brown said to me, they don't know what that's cost them.
January 2007. While Tommy Ray Heine fights to be recognized as Brown's rightful widow, his children wait to hear about their emergency petition to have Albert Dallas, David Cannon, and Alfred Bradley removed as trustees of the estate.
Mr. Brown's children wanted to become managers or trustees of the trust.
That's the thing about trustees, whether they would do a better job or whatever. That'd be like me, going into, say for example, walking on a job to drive a crane, and I've never driven a crane before.
Doing what the will and the trust directs. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Nothing pleased anybody. And the only person that should have been pleased was Mr. Brown. He directed it.
If he wanted you to run it, you'd have been running it.
Yama and Deanna Brown move forward and point to a clause in the I Feel Good Trust for Needy Children that allows the trustees to keep up to 50% of Brown's estate as administration fees. To them, an unheard of amount for a charitable trust.
We know most people are gonna take up to 50%. If it allows them to, they're gonna take it.
With the stage set for a three-way battle of wills over the estate of James Brown, differences within the Brown family lead to infighting. Brown's family is divided, with its members challenging each other's credibility.
If you lay cheese out, rats are eventually gonna go get the cheese.
They wanted to paint this picture that we were lying, we just wanted more money, and that was it.
Grandson William James hits where it hurts.
There is no difference in hanging a black man from a tree in 1965 than there is hanging a black man in a courtroom in South Carolina in 2012.
James Brown's death leaves family members upset over how his estate is to be managed and divided. Two separate petitions are filed in order to contest Brown's last will and testament. February 20th, 2007. As requested by Brown's daughters Yama and Deanna, the court replaces trustees Albert Dallas, David Cannon, and Alfred Bradley with temporary trustees who will monitor the alleged wrongdoings. William James Brown can't believe it.
If he saw no right to get rid of these men at any time, who am I to pass judgment on them? Who am I to say they handled James Brown's business wrong? If James Brown thought his business was being handled just fine, who am I to offer an opinion about it?
Have only sought to carry out what Mr. Brown directed that I do. I didn't ask to be Mr. Brown's personal representative or trustee. I didn't ask for that job.
There are increasing tensions in the Brown family between those who oppose the will and those who accept it. William James and his father Terry stand by the will from the start.
Unlike the rest of my family, I don't want a dime from my grandfather. He's already given me everything I need. He's given me the tools to go out and compete in the world and make something of myself.
He took care of me, took care of my family. You know what I mean? What the hell can I say about the man because he didn't leave no money? It's his damn money. You know what I'm saying? And that's where the greed and all that craziness comes in, man.
For members of my family to try to perpetuate the idea that he was unduly influenced in some way, I think further shows how out of step, how out of touch, and how much they did not understand my grandfather.
The accusations put Yama Brown on the defensive.
They wanted to paint this picture that we were lying, we just wanted more money, and that was it.
It's just like if you lay cheese out, rats are eventually going to go get the cheese. That is to say, they all want to be something or have something that they're not entitled to, that they are not.
I mean, our family really thought about it and really talked about what our dad would have wanted. And what we know he would not have wanted was all this turmoil over his estate.
I don't know what my sister's after. You know, I can't speak for them. You know? I mean, if that's the case, if they're after something or whatever, I wish them luck. I hope they find it.
While Brown's 6 legitimate children are divided over the will, many others claim to be his illegitimate offspring.
Mr. Brown loved women. Let there be no doubt about that. And he never wanted for women.
The 1960s and 1970s are a time of free love, and that certainly proves true for James Brown.
He had wives, he had girlfriends, he had one-night stands, and he had people working for him who were sort of air traffic controllers, who had to make sure that none of these bodies collided or ever met each other. It must have been a fearful job.
He was a player, man. He's James Brown, man. You know, what woman wouldn't want a man of power like that? You know, it ain't like he had to go out here and stand on the corner and wait. They came to him. Remember that.
But Brown's philandering will come back to haunt him. DNA tests prove that he fathers at least 3 illegitimate children over the years. As a result, Brown's illegitimate grandchildren will be eligible as beneficiaries of the Brown Family Education Trust. 2007, the temporary trustees hold an auction of Brown's belongings in order to cover legal fees and maintenance on his house. But this decision doesn't please everyone.
A lot of us were for it, but some of us were against it because some of the things that were sold were things that we did not agree on.
Unsatisfied by the current management of the estate, Brown's children decide to propose a settlement to the courts. They invite another key player in the battle against Brown's will to join them, Brown's widow Tommy Ray Heine, mother of James Brown Jr.
Their son was our family, that was like our brother, and he's a kid. He's the same age as my son. And so we felt an overwhelming sisterly, brotherly responsibility to make sure he was gonna be okay.
The settlement takes several months to prepare. It proposes to divide Brown's estate into 4 equal shares, one for his 6 adult children, and another for Tommy Ray Heine and James Brown Jr. The remaining 50% is to be split between the Brown Family Education and I Feel Good trusts.
Did Mr. Brown have the right to expect that his will and trust would be enforced by the court? Absolutely, as any other individual who makes a will and trust. They have the right to expect the courts to enforce it according to its terms.
The settlement is submitted to Judge Doyet A. Early in the Circuit Court of Aiken County, South Carolina in 2009. The settlement is approved on May 26, 2009. Dallas and his fellow trustees are shocked. Was justice truly served?
She, Tommy Ray, claimed to be the spouse and now apparently is going to walk away with 25% of the total estate that has previously been entrusted to needy and underprivileged children, that I find to be absolutely unbelievable.
For William James Brown, the judge's decision is a slap in the face to his grandfather's original wishes.
I can say this much about it. There is no difference in hanging a black man from a tree in 1965 than there is hanging a black man in a courtroom in South Carolina in 2012.
How can there be any question about what Mr. Brown's intentions were? Read the document. It tells you unequivocally what he wanted. Why has the Attorney General of South Carolina turned its back on James Brown's wishes?
The decision represents a victory for Yama Brown. After all, half of Brown's estate is still being allocated to education.
We respected his wishes, and I still feel like we respect his wishes.
The two charitable trusts fall under the jurisdiction of the Attorney General of South Carolina.
They are there to make sure that that trust gets carried out. We asked for the judge to bring a party in that could help administer that. In other words, we as the family aren't even administering that. We won't even, quote unquote, touch that money. We'll help in the process determine who gets it and things like that.
As for the money itself, it's still tied up in legal red tape.
Do you know that not only has not one child received 1 penny to be educated, but 30+ lawyers have billed tens of millions of dollars in the face of those children not being educated?
5.5 years later, to my knowledge, not one dime. Isn't it ironic?
We couldn't do anything because we were tied up in this court, all this court stuff. So any monies that were coming in were going to more attorneys.
The underprivileged kids right now, those are the ones who are suffering. They suffering. They need educations, man. His grandchildren, their education ain't secure,
Mr. Attorney General, you have a fiduciary responsibility to help educate children. You have a responsibility to protect this trust. The legal courts in South Carolina, you have a responsibility to give a man due process, to give a man's will the respect it deserves.
In June 2007, Albert Dallas, David Cannon, and Alfred Bradley resign as trustees, or are forced to resign, according to Dallas, who points out what he sees as the bitter irony in all of this.
Whomever winds up doing all of this will be charging the same kind of fees that Mr. Brown provided for. And it was Mr. Brown's choice whom he wanted to carry out those duties. That's the thing that's so hurtful about all of this.
These were good men. They were decent men. They were honest men. They were loyal. They did what Mr. Brown, my grandfather, asked them to do, without question, without fail, every single time.
I've often thought, wouldn't it be great if Mr. Brown could walk into the courtroom, would be held to pay. Be held to pay.
Darrell and William James Brown have already paid their price for trying to uphold the Godfather of Soul's final wishes.
Does it hurt that you've been ostracized by your family? Of course it does. Does it hurt on holidays you can't see your family? You can't pick up the phone and say, hey, I love you. You can't gather together. Sure, those things hurt.
Like any other siblings, man, we have disagreements. We don't agree with each other all the time. You know what I'm saying? And we would like to be closer, at times.
But at the same time, I owe as much to my grandfather to do the right thing, to stand there, resolute and firm, to carry out his wishes, regardless of what the consequences are. Because in the end, without James Brown, there's no William Brown. Because he lived, I live. That's the bottom line to it.
It's a strain, man, you know what I mean? But the funny thing about it is that, you know, you put us all together, we all look alike.
It's a lot of work for my brothers and sisters and I to continue on, but it's worth it. You know, he came from nothing and built all of that. So the least I can do as his child is to continue it on in a positive way, in a way that would make him happy.
I love the man. He was my friend. He trusted me to see that his wishes were carried out, as I did for 24 years during his lifetime.
In the end, the music lives on.
James Brown, he's known as the godfather of soul, but he's really one of the most colossal figures in American pop music. I mean, this is a guy who really defined a sound, that sound being funk music, and its legacy just trickles on down through the decades.
Play Pass the Peas, play Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, play all that amazing music, play the funk. Just play it once, and it washes away all this other stuff.